There's some doctrinal concepts that are easier said than done. And so today we want to talk about forgiveness. I have a friend of mine, Marc Smith, joining me here. And so we're going to have a conversation. Hopefully we can solve all the mysteries of the universe revolving around forgiveness. Take a listen to what Marc and I have to say. Are you ready? Let's roll. Doing good?
I'm doing good. Yes.
Good to be sitting down in the studio. My very highfalutin.
Yeah, it's very high end.
Oh,
yes,
man, it is. It's good for a garage, right?
Yes, it is.
Well, we wanted to sit down and chat a little bit about the concept of forgiveness. We did do this, but unfortunately my mic setup wasn't good. So we're here chatting again.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I just figured the Lord had something else he needed to come across.
Works for me. He knows what he's doing, right?
That's right. That's right. And you and I get a chance to hang out a little bit more together.
Hey, there's nothing wrong there at all.
Right.
It's just
exactly.
good.
It is.
So give me a little bit of a snapshot into kind of your experience with forgiveness.
My experience, it's been about a couple of years I've really kind of focused on it.
Mm-hmm.
I went through a divorce 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and that's really what stirred the waters in me thinking about what forgiveness is.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what got me going.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like the Lord sent certain things into my path that just caused me to think that, do we as Christians really understand what forgiveness is?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, you've got the one view that we need to confess each and every sin, and I've just been really focusing on what that looks like, what it's all about.
Yeah. There's like a twofold, as it seems to me, type of forgiveness. There's the vertical, without God's forgiveness, we're kind of hosed in terms of eternity. But he granted us that. The gospel's written and given to us, not written, but it's lived out by Jesus himself, so that we can have that vertical kind of forgiveness. But then there's that horizontal one between humans.
Correct.
It seems
Yes.
like we kind of smell bad about doing that in a
Right.
real practical sense. So it kind of, to your point, do we really understand it?
And to me, I grew up with a totally different view of forgiveness than I think that I've come to.
Well, what have you come to?
Well, maybe the best way to put it, and I think we did last time, used it as an illustration of, and this is not, I'm not saying it's wrong or bad or anything like that, but it kind of really illustrates how we typically view forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Imagine two kids, playing in the yard, and one boy takes the ball away from the other. And
you're talking about my boys. Right now.
I had a few kids do that myself, but anyway, they, one kind of throws a fit, comes, Dad, so-and-so took the ball away. And so you go and talk and say, oh, you need to share. You shouldn't have taken away. Now go say you're sorry. Mm-hmm. And of course they go over there, I'm sorry, with a little pouty face, and now say you're forgiven. Oh, yeah, you're forgiven. Mm-hmm. And those are, I think they're good practices, but that's not really, I think, what the Bible is talking about in forgiveness.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. What is it talking about?
I think what I've really come to see is that forgiveness really is an attitude of a Spirit-led believer. Mm-hmm. If the Spirit is working in the life of a believer and it's producing fruit, the spiritual fruit of the believer,
right,
that forgiveness takes on a whole different meaning when somebody has offended us. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the vertical forgiveness as well as a horizontal, but even in the horizontal forgiveness, we have somebody offending us and us offending somebody. So that's a two-way street, which I think is different too.
Sure.
And that'd be fun to talk about as well. But when we as Christians love one another, other places in the Bible talk about, keep no record of wrongs. Mm-hmm. Love keeps no record of wrongs.
Right.
And so really, we, by nature as Christians, really should be a forgiving people.
Yeah.
It should be easy to forgive.
It should be.
It should be.
Why is it so honking hard then?
That is a huge question. And two, the other thing I want to maybe preface too is that when I talk about kind of my idea of forgiveness, I'm really an idealist. And so it's easy to talk about it.
Yeah.
But frankly, I'm convinced it's impossible to do. And the reason I use the word impossible to do is because I think it really needs the Spirit at work in us to actually do it. So when somebody has been horribly offended or horribly wronged, or even damaged, it's not an easy thing. And our Lord is gracious and understands that too, that it can be a process. But I think it's really helpful for us to actually look at what it means and what benefits we have as believers of being quick to forgive.
So go into some of those benefits. In the last couple of years, you've made it a focus. You've really kind of dived into what does it look like? What does it mean? What are some of those benefits that you've seen in your life as you've really adopted a deeper understanding of what forgiveness truly is?
I think the greatest benefit of it is that when we are forgiving other people, it grants freedom in us. We have this sense of, because when you're holding something against somebody, there's bondage. I mean, you're stuck with it. It seems to fester, to grow, and becomes bitterness and these things. But when we are quick to forgive, there is a difference, and some we could talk about too, because we don't necessarily forgive and forget.
Right.
That's
an old wives' tale, it seems like.
Exactly, and there is a sense where we want to give people a benefit of the doubt. But in an unsafe situation, you can forgive, but you still have to have boundaries. That you, as you work on that relationship, to to grant freedom, and so it's not a damaging relationship.
So am I hearing you say that with true forgiveness comes the proper boundaries that create a safer relational environment? Am I hearing you say that, or am I interpreting it wrong?
I believe so. I really believe so, because as we endeavor in those relationships, and as we value those relationships, because if we are forgiving one another, that is a relational thing, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And so if we are valuing that relationship, there still is boundaries that have to exist, and trust does have to be rebuilt, things like that. But
I'm glad you said that part too. Because trust can be violated, and we can forgive them through processes and so forth. And maybe we can talk about some of the processes you found to be valuable. But where was I going? It's a good thing I can edit. We can go through that forgiveness piece, but until we can rebuild the trust, the relationship isn't necessarily the same.
Correct.
It changes, but it can be rebuilt.
Correct. Right.
With a constant state of maybe new forgiveness. I love that point. So I don't want to cut you off, but I'm curious what processes you've found to be beneficial for getting to a place where you've truly forgiven someone.
Boy, that's really hard, because I can look at the instances in my life, and I tend to be one who kind of process it through the Word of God and tries desperately to apply it to my life. And if we have somebody who has wronged us, then realizing that issue of love and trying to honor them, and looking at what the scriptures say about love, what love looks like, and in that relationship, I think that really helps govern that I'm not sure about the processes.
Well, there may not be anything in particular. Sometimes there isn't a formula. We like formulas.
Exactly.
And so I was hoping maybe you had found something that works for you, and it doesn't work for everybody else. But a formula can be a benefit in terms of just finding a way to start down the path of letting somebody else off of your hook by forgiving them.
Right. And I do have one example that I think could be helpful, at least of how I kind of came across it.
Yeah.
And it was in the middle of our divorce. And I was listening to a speaker, and he was talking about how Christianity is different than any other religion in one point, is that we are commanded to love our enemies. And the thought went through my mind, my soon-to-be former spouse is not my enemy. Right. She feels like it, right? Yeah. She feels like it, but she's not my enemy. And if I'm supposed to love her, because of the divorce and those proceedings, that relationship changes, and there's those boundaries again.
Sure.
But my view of trying to let that go and actually acknowledge she really isn't my enemy was very healing, and sent me down that road toward forgiveness.
How'd you discover that? You had the speaker.
Right. But I think it was just the Holy Spirit would just hit me at the right time with two different thoughts.
You mean God knew what he was doing?
Yeah, he really does, doesn't he?
Crazy. I can't believe that. A sovereign God knows stuff? No way.
That's right. That's right.
Oh man. So in your experience, or those experiences of others that what are some commonalities that are reasons people don't forgive?
I think a lot of it has to deal with the pain. They hurt, and they feel like the hurt has to be gone before they forgive.
Wow. Yeah.
And, and I think that's just very common, because when, even like with the little kids, well, do you want to forgive them? No. Why not? Because I don't feel like it. Right. I think that really what it boils down to. And I think that sends us to the throne room of heaven, saying, Lord, how do I forgive this person? I have my stepfather, before he married my mother, his wife, while he was still married, was crossing a street in Salem, and a guy in a 4-wheel drive pickup had a red light and turned right just as the light turned green, and she stepped out into the sidewalk, and he ran over her.
Oh man.
And I talked a lot to him, years ago about that, because he ended up really forgiving that guy and going into the prisons, or into the prison to actually talk with him about it, and because the guy felt horrible.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
So it's more of a difficult situation when people are not sorry.
Sure.
But yet, when we have an offense like that and a person isn't sorry, who's controlling that relationship?
Right.
The person who we can turn it around and forgive, let that go.
Yeah.
And I've also viewed forgiveness as somebody owing me a debt, right? Somebody's offended me. They should make it right, but they haven't, right? So I've got this debt. I've got this, I'm a creditor. And I see forgiveness because we can't make somebody make it right.
Right.
But we can turn the debt over to somebody else to do our collection for us, to totally release them and just leave them in the Lord's hands.
What a good imagery.
Because he can collect, he can change hearts, he can restore that relationship whereas everything we do, we may not be able to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's one practical way that the gospel impacts forgiveness?
Oh, that's, to me, is
only one.
Only one. Oh, my
one,
stars. My mind goes directly to, I think it's Luke 7, talking about, when Mary was, when Jesus was in the Pharisee's house and Mary came in with a prostitute, was washing Jesus's feet and with her hair and, with her tears and all of these things. And the Pharisee was thinking, well, if Jesus were a prophet, he'd know what kind of a woman this is and never let her touch him.
Yeah.
And of course, Jesus knew the thoughts and said, hey, if somebody has two debtors, one owed him 500 denarii and one owed 50, neither of them could pay. If the master or if the creditor forgave both, which one would love him more? Of course, the Pharisee said, well, probably the guy who owed 500, the greater. And Jesus turned around and said, if he who has been forgiven much loves much.
Yeah.
It doesn't exactly say that, because he talks about Mary Magdalene and that she is so thankful for the forgiveness that Christ had given to her, and she loved much. But Jesus turned around and used the negative and say, he who has been forgiven little loves little.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, and that's one of the things in my life, that if I don't feel like I'm loving like I should, I try to just take my temperature and say, am I really remembering how much I've been forgiven?
Right.
Because if we remember how much we've been forgiven, how could we really hold anything against anybody?
That seems like a common thing, at least in my observation, is that folks get focused in on the breakdown of other people's issues and forget about the magnitude of any level of forgiveness from a perfect God,
right? That
came and said, you know what, I like you and I love you both.
Yeah.
So much so that I'm gonna make sure that I come myself to take care of. The only way I can take care of all this issue of you being so far separated from me, and I'm gonna make it right. Do we forget the magnitude of that when we hold on to, somebody stole my bike, or pick sin X and fill it in there. Yeah. And we granted, in our human understanding, some things are harder to forgive than others, but having that level of comparison to say, I've received the gospel. Yeah. And I believe on Jesus, and he's taken care of stuff for me. Yep. And it's heavy. Yeah. He took that weight and bore it. But am I going to be willing to take this little, in comparison, this pesky thing? Yeah. It's easier said than done.
It is, exactly.
But it takes a process to go and make yourself aware of that, of the magnitude of my own disparity between me and God. Right. And then that person's disparity between me and them becomes much, much smaller. Exactly. But if we don't stop to think about that and consider that reality, we start pointing the finger, we start holding on to grudges and getting, like you said, bitter, and it's just no bueno. Exactly. One of the things I have thought about in the past was, and don't answer this. Okay. You won't want to answer this. Not on air. But allow for a second your worst sin to flash through your mind and disappear. Okay. And all of us have those that we do not want, on the big screen in heaven, right? Right. And we also coupled that with, we live in a society that's really into identifying, right? Mm-hmm. Could we picture
that Jesus, he not only took the payment for our sins, but it says he became sin
Right.
for us. And he identified as X.
That thing.
You know, there's pedophiles
Mm-hmm.
that have become believers.
Right.
Christ identified as that
Mm-hmm.
for that person to be saved, to take the penalty.
Wow.
And when I look at my life, I
Mm-hmm.
think, if he identified for
Mm-hmm.
that and those things,
Yeah.
how can I really be that
Mm-hmm.
upset because somebody said X to me,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
You know, or they didn't look at me like they should have, or,
Yeah.
you know.
They cut me off in traffic.
Exactly. Well, that's an exemption, but
On Fridays.
That's right. That's right.
Oh,
But that's been a good way for me to just really
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
pull myself into perspective of trying to let things go.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we hold on to things, those things build,
Mm-hmm.
and relationships are destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And as we are, if we are committed to relationships,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we will want to we will want to do things to try to benefit those things and
Mhm.
cause them to grow.
Yeah.
And but I know there's a lot of relationships people would not want to be in. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a rape situation,
Yeah.
that's not a continuing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But harboring
Mm-hmm.
unforgiveness and bitterness is only going to hurt one person.
Right.
You know, and it's not
Yeah.
the person, and it's not the person who should be harmed
Mm-hmm.
in
Right.
that situation.
Yeah. That should receive consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were talking as you were finishing your haircut in the room next door about this idea that I lost my train of thought again. See, when I don't have things to look at, I go all over the place. What were we talking about in there? One of the things.
Oh, the issue of the effects of doctrine, is that what you're talking about? How
No,
people can have very
no,
beautiful doctrine, but not be nice people.
No, it was a different thing. Oh, the Frozen Chosen.
The Frozen Chosen, yes.
So yeah, in the salon, we were talking about this idea that Christians are often forgetful about their kindness qualities that we've been given
Mhm.
because of this forgiveness, because of receiving the gospel, because we get so left-brained and we stick in. Yeah, so it did have to do with the doctrine issue, and I'm going to focus left-brained, but we forget about this relational aspect. How can, again, this is just two regular fellas talking about this, but how can we as Christians do a better job of using both parts of our brain in terms of forgiveness?
Well, one of the things you can do is look at the signs that you're not doing that, not focusing on relationships, because it's really hard to think that you're not a relational person. If you are totally focused on doctrine
Mm-hmm.
and love to win arguments in it, that's kind of a good sign, right?
That's an indicator.
Yeah. And the other thing that as neuroscientists talk about is with the left side of your brain, if you've shut off the relational side,
Mm-hmm.
the way you view people changes.
Sure.
And hey, let's use your cutting off in a car situation, okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because when somebody cuts you off in a car, they're not as much of a person. It's easy to be mad at them. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
But you remember that old song? Was it that POW 409 or I can't remember.
8675309. That's a pickup line, Mark.
No. No, it's a story of a guy getting cut off in traffic and he's all mad, and then he looks down and the license plate says that the guy was a POW.
Oh.
And so he goes into, in his thoughts thinking, this guy was overseas in Vietnam or World War II or whatever.
He became a person again.
Yeah, he became a person, and he was sensitive to that. So if we kind of depersonalize, and ways we depersonalize is if somebody is an enemy to fight, if somebody is a tool to use.
Yeah.
then you know that you're not focused on that relational side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And neuroscientists actually say that the best way to get back into the relational side of things is focus on gratitude.
Hmm.
And I mean that's related to our forgiveness discussion too, because if we are not forgiving somebody, they are an enemy.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And if they are a friend, or if we get out of enemy mode, even if we can't be a friend to them, they are a person.
Yeah.
So even that lack of forgiveness can be a very good judge of what it means, what side of the brain we're on.
Yeah. And if we're overly on one side versus the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's good.
And in churches, it's really easy too. There's actually a book out there. I don't know if you want this later,
no, go ahead.
but it's called The Other Half of Church.
Ooh.
And it's a neuroscientist actually talking about, God being a full-brained God of, designing us to operate on both spheres.
Okay.
Literally. I didn't even think about that.
Hey.
But yeah.
Both side of the hemispheres.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just focusing on just doctrine and things like that, because, if we study theology, right?
Right.
Theology is a study of God.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't affect us, in that relationship with Him, what good is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reason we study it, and it's not just to know it.
Right.
It's to get to know the author of those doctrines. And see how that doctrine then impacts the soul.
Exactly. Because those doctrines should affect us.
Yeah.
It should cause us gratitude or wow.
It's such a good wrap point is that with the gospel doctrine, it's an impact point that affects not just how our mind thinks, Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That transformation comes when our mind is being renewed. So we get our brain, but the transformation, at least in my simplistic mindset, it's that the outworking and the relational ability comes from a new mind.
Right.
When we can focus on understanding new things, but letting them work out in our lives instead of just knowing the stuff. It just doesn't go as far if we just know stuff.
It isn't. In fact,
useless trivia.
It's kind of funny because in circles that are very focused on doctrine, there's a term for young men who have gotten really into doctrine. They're called thunder babies.
Thunder babies.
Yeah, because they like it because they're quick to try to disprove somebody else.
Mm.
Of course, everybody wants to win a good argument.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, most people do.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even really try very often. Try to ask more questions than anything else. Good talk. I think this is good. It's been good for me. Hopefully the people that are sitting in the chairs just outside of the interwebs find this beneficial. So thanks for getting your hair cut and then coming to see me in the studio.
Thank you. It's too bad we don't have cameras that you could have seen it, but that could have been scary too.
Maybe I'll put a picture of you on the post about it.
Oh, I don't know.
A link to that. This is Mark.
No.
All right, thanks,
It was
Mark.
good to talk.
I thought there was a few things in that conversation that I wanted to draw out a little bit. That for one, I'm going to have to really put some application in for me. But the concept of forgiveness being the right response, I mean, it's just the right thing for us to do, and partially because it's personally valuable. It's valuable to the person giving the forgiveness. We think of it like, well, they're receiving something, or maybe I think of it that way. They're receiving forgiveness, which is true, but it's not the only way that it's beneficial. So something to consider there. And then what Mark brought up, that he who is forgiven much loves much, and he who is forgiven little loves little. Our demonstration of our gratefulness or gratitude towards God for the forgiveness that he's given. It's a lot bigger than, somebody stole my bike, somebody cut me off in traffic, somebody offended me, somebody cheated, all the different things that we can do. God took on all the sin, all of it. Yours, theirs, all the people. It's been taken on and taken over. That's a little bit bigger deal, a lot bigger deal than, our what amounts to being petty. And I don't mean to downplay people's hurts, but in comparison, if we've been forgiven, we should love God by loving others. But if you've not been forgiven much, you haven't received much forgiveness, you maybe haven't recognized the magnitude of your own sin. And so I think that's something that we as Christians, that might be a way for us to be better at giving the gift of forgiveness, if we can really recognize our own fall downs and the things that separate us as individual, myself, from God, without that forgiveness. So in the show notes, you'll see a link to the book that Mark mentioned. I've never read it, but he recommended it, and he's a smart dude. I did find out after recording that we're not just two normal dudes. I'm a normal dude, but Mark has a PhD in theology, so he knows a lot of this stuff. He's a smart cookie, but he's a really loving fella, so I was glad to have him on. So, think about this forgiveness idea, and how do you receive it? How do you give it out? And maybe that's a better way a way that you can better show the love of God that you've been given by giving it out a little bit more freely. Take a personal inventory, find out where you stand with it. And man, wouldn't that be cool if we all got better at forgiving? I wonder what would be different in terms of how people are drawn to, not us, but drawn to Jesus, because he's the author and finisher of the faith. And that faith is where we receive that forgiveness. So cool thoughts. Thanks again, Mark, for coming on and hanging out in my garage with me. Yeah, we'll talk to you guys next time. I love you.